Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining me for another restful episode of true, scary stories to help you fall asleep. Today, we're going to be reading true, creepy backwoods horror stories. I hope you enjoy them. So, like I promised in the last video, we're going to be featuring a comment from one of the previous videos. The comment that we're going to be featuring today is from a Backwoods video from quite a while ago, to be honest. The comment is from Dorian Abrams 9049, and it reads, "Just out of curiosity, the couple hiking and camping in Virginia, what would happen if you ended up shooting one of these weirdos in the woods? I mean, you're so far from civilization, no cell phone unless a sat phone, and you choose to use it. I'm just saying, nobody would really know anything, right?" And to be honest, yeah, I agree. That's why I find the backwoods so terrifying. Even more terrifying than the wild animals that are out there. I think humans are the number one most scary thing that you can encounter when you're hiking or doing anything of that nature deep in the country. People could do a lot of things and not a lot can be done about it. But anyway, thank you so much for your comment. And if you want to be featured in a future video, make sure that you leave a comment on this video. I'm going to be featuring a comment at the beginning of every video from here on out. And if you like this, let me know down in the comments. But anyways, without further ado, lay back, relax, and enjoy these true, scary stories. Hey y'all, I've been dying to tell my story about my experience in Brenham, Texas. I went to the junior college there in 2010 to 2011. My friend and I met some local guys that wanted to show us around. So one night they invited us to some house that they knew was haunted. I absolutely hate being scared, so I was very stern when I said that I wasn't going. No one cared if I went or stayed, honestly. I decided to stay in the car. We were parked in a Lowe's parking lot, and next door to the parking lot was a huge abandoned lot full of trees and tall grass. If you weren't a local, you would never even know that there was a house back there. As soon as they started walking away, I jumped out of the car and I was going with them. I was scared to go, but I was also scared to stay in the car by myself. As we were walking towards the house, there was a long sidewalk along the fence line. It looked like a newer sidewalk too, which kind of threw me off guard. As we approached the house, it was so dark, you could barely even see the house. The trees were covering the moonlight. So we opened the door, and as soon as you walk in, there are stairs to go upstairs. We didn't even bring a flashlight. So like I said, this is 2010 to 2011. iPhones were becoming more popular, and I had just gotten mine. I let them use my phone for a flashlight. As we start walking upstairs, there is the loudest sound of what I assumed were combat boots running from one side of the house to the other, upstairs, and we all completely freeze and don't even say a word. In that moment, my body was truly numb. I know for a fact I have never been so scared in my life. Everyone paused for a second and then continued on, as if nothing just happened. And when we get upstairs, there is so much junk on the ground. Glass, cards, clothes, blankets. I pick up a piece of paper from the ground. It turned out to be a thank you card. It was from 1920. We open the closet and there are top hats and clothes from what seemed to be a very long time ago, untouched. Obviously, people had vandalized this place, but there was still stuff from the 20s in this house. There were so many bed cots in this whole entire second floor. It was one big room, not multiple rooms. They had what I assumed to be bloodstains on them. Just as we're about to start heading downstairs, my phone completely glitches out, starts rebooting and has the dial on my phone where it's acting as if it's loading. Won't turn back on at all. So it's pitch black in this room. My friend and I had just went that day to buy her a new camera, and she still had it with her. We decided to just keep taking pictures to let the flash guide us back downstairs. As we're trying to keep flashing the camera, it starts glitching also and saying lens error. We had just bought the camera that day. The camera finally turns back on and is flashing uncontrollably. We weren't even touching it, and it just kept going on and on. My phone finally turns back on. We walk downstairs, and I kid you not, there is a humongous chair with a tall back facing the front door. Obviously, it wasn't there when we just walked in 10 minutes ago. So I am immediately like, hey, it's time for us to go. My friend starts asking if someone can take her picture while sitting in the chair. I'm begging her at this point for us to just get out of there. She tells me, after you take this one picture, we will leave. So I take the picture and mason jars start flying at us. We start running out of the house and right hand on the Bible. As I'm running out of the house, a huge owl swoops down on me, and the guy running behind me jumps on my back as we fall. He was just as scared as I was. Once we got back to the car, I was in such a bad mood. I was so upset that we went to this place, and I was more mad at myself for not just sitting in the car. The local guys finally told us the story about the house. They said it was a veterinarian's office back in the early 1900s, and he would also foster children. The second floor was where the children slept, on the cots, and they said he started to go mad and started doing weird experiments on the children and killing them. I halfway believed this story. I was kind of like, okay, this is a local hometown story that gets told to all of us college kids every year. Until I saw the pictures that the camera took. The camera that had a lens error. The pictures that were on the camera literally gave me nightmares for weeks. I had to call my grandparents and let them pray over me because I could not sleep. At all. The pictures were kids' faces melting in the walls. It was the scariest thing I've ever seen in my life. I've looked for any records on this place. I've not been able to find one archive or article about it. I've searched high and low for anything about this property, and nothing. I just wanted to share this and see if anybody has heard of this place, and if anyone has any information or has trespassed like we did. I have so many scary stories about different Texas cities that I've lived in. Feel free to ask any questions about this story, or anything else. Preface. So I'm not at all one of those people who believed in anything paranormal or spiritual until after this experience. A year later, it's still bothering me, and I haven't got much of an answer as to what this even was. I'm hoping to get some logical answers to put my mind at ease since it's been this long. Quick background. My partner at the time was in the military, an avid outdoorsman, has the stereotypical macho personality, has camped in different states, and doesn't believe in supernatural, spirits, etc., and grew up religious. I work in outdoor settings. I'm an avid outdoors woman. Camped in different states. Before this experience, I was agnostic and didn't really believe in the supernatural, but I believed in people's experiences. On to the experience. My partner at the time and I wanted to go camping in the Allegheny National Forest for his birthday. He had this dispersed camping spot that him and his family used to go, and his family still goes there occasionally. I haven't camped in a while, but I'm an avid outdoors woman. This spot was about 2 miles from Minster Creek Campground. We went on a Thursday in September of 2023 in hopes of getting the area to ourselves, which we were lucky to have. We even checked out Minster Creek Campground and didn't see a single person. I do recall the area being oddly quiet in terms of wildlife. There were no crickets, frogs, birds, branches snapping or anything. It was just the sound of the stream the whole day and night. I know that wildlife starts to quiet down during this time, but I thought it was really odd on how eerily quiet it was. I could hear my own breathing, which was a bit unnerving. I've never been to a place so stagnant from wildlife. As nightfall came, We hiked up to the car that was parked on the side of the road to brush our teeth to avoid attracting bears at the campsite with our scented toothpaste. As we were brushing our teeth by the car, around 11 p.m., I kept hearing this drumming sound. At first, I thought it might have been some truck in the distance, brake checking, but there was not a single car or person in sight. We looked at each other very confused as it kept getting louder and louder. It was a steady drumming beat which echoed through the entire valley. It got so loud at times where I honestly thought someone had a boombox, or that my head was pounding from the intense hike back to the car. But again, not a single person was around. The campsite is a half a mile from the car, down a very steep hill. We had a clear view of the nearby dispersed spots, and didn't see any flashlights, fire, cars, or people. My partner was too focused on brushing his teeth, while I was just confused about the drumming. I automatically assumed after a while that it might have been some sort of fracking machinery nearby. When we finished brushing our teeth, we stood there and talked about breakfast for the morning, but the drumming got so loud to the point where we couldn't hear each other without raising our voices slightly. After I expressed my progressing confusion with my partner, he then also became concerned and started walking up and down the road with his flashlight, looking for anything that would explain this. At this point, 30 minutes has gone by. The drumming is still going. It's in a steady rhythm, and the volume of the drumming dips from loud to heavy to soft and light. I come to the conclusion that it's just some sort of machinery somewhere as we head back down to the campsite. I didn't sleep well that night due to how uncomfortably quiet it was, and I didn't think about the drumming for the rest of the night, nor did we hear the drumming for the rest of the night. The next morning, the day just feels uncomfortable, and tension starts to build between my partner and I for no reason. This may seem unrelated, but I promise I'm going somewhere with this. That following night, my intuition was screaming at me that we shouldn't be there. My partner saw how visibly uncomfortable I was, and said that he also felt like something was off there, and we made the decision to pack up all of our things around 10 p.m. and leave that night. The hike back to the car with our belongings felt like the longest, most exhausting and stressful hike in my entire life. Yes, it was steep and we overpacked, but I've never seen such anger from my partner about the hike. We were both carrying extremely heavy things, but it felt like it was impossible to get back to the top. He was screaming in frustration, swearing up a storm, and I've never felt so weak in my life. We finally get to the top, pack our things, and start driving. Tension eases and we reflect on the uncomfortable night and day there. The conversation goes back to not knowing what the drumming sound was, and we start to realize how unsettling that actually was. Unrelated, but on our way back to the interstate, there was an LED billboard that had information about a missing person with their license plate number. For some reason, that solidified for me that I felt like we were not at all meant to be in that area. Now, onto the aftermath. For weeks, I started to become obsessed with this entire experience in terms of figuring out what the sound was and why the area felt so off. I found someone's post on Reddit frequently from a few years ago about the exact same experience with the drumming in the same exact area around Minister Creek Campground. This made me feel less crazy, and when I shared it with my partner, he started to get visibly uncomfortable. He asked his family if they had ever experienced anything like this, and they said no, and thought we were crazy or just had too much sun. I never believed in bad spirits or bad energy until after this, and could almost feel it in my body. I started looking into spiritual practices that could remove whatever I was feeling, and my ex was also open to the idea, since he also felt weird from the experience. We did a couple of things, but then faded out after a while. This is also unrelated, but ever since this camping experience, our relationship spiraled into toxicity that I've never seen before, and he became a stranger. We're no longer together, as I didn't feel safe with him anymore. Am I blaming this experience for the end of our relationship? Absolutely not. But do I think this location caused a shift between us? Yes. Now for the follow-up. I got in contact with this gentleman who goes around the Allegheny National Forest drumming on his drum set with a mask I found online by searching. I was convinced that it was him. I told him about the experience and he explained that he uses a drum set and not a single drum like we heard. He also stated that he wasn't in the area during that time. His social media shows that proof, and that he doesn't drum that part of the forest. His geotags are on his videos. This was the closest I've gotten to finding an answer, but I do not believe this was him. He also just recently started doing this, which is also shown on his social media. I do not think this man is messing with me. Now the present. This may not sound like a big deal, or might sound like it can be explained, but I have been coping by becoming spiritual in a new age kind of way. This has helped me feel a lot safer from the experience and the feeling. That's how much this has impacted me. I wish I was joking. I still think about the experience on a monthly basis, and since it's getting closer to that time of year again, I figured I'd finally post something about this after fearing judgment. I really just want answers so that I can have some peace of mind. Is there a fracking site nearby? Is there some sort of logging equipment that goes off at night? Are there indigenous communities in that area that have ceremonial events nearby? Are the hippies drumming on a Thursday night that can keep a steady pace and not miss a beat? Are there kids in the area that play pranks on people? Please, I need answers. It's driving me nuts. Here's a link to the OG poster. As an avid bird watcher and a person who works in the biology field, I can promise you that it was not a ruffed grouse. Additionally, attacking me for my beliefs because it doesn't align with yours doesn't make you cool. It makes you a jerk. I've stated multiple times in my post that I'm looking for a logical explanation or answer, and I am sharing what this experience has done to me. I'm not sure if this helps with anything, but it was a full moon that night, which is also starting to make me think that it was ceremonial. Now we're going to read the original post that was mentioned in our last story. So I came across this group when I was trying to research my experience, and I'm new to Reddit but wanted to post my experience, as I've seen other posts online of similar experiences. I was backpacking last weekend in the Allegheny National Forest in northwestern Pennsylvania with a friend of mine and his teenage son. We hiked the Minister Creek Trail and set up camp that night about 4 miles away from the trailhead. We saw only 2 other parties that day, and neither were overnighting on the trail. We explored the area we camped in extensively to find the best campsite, and did not see any other campers within at least a mile in either direction. The rest of the forest was heavy growth hillsides on either side of the valley, without anywhere good to set up camp. At about 2 a.m., I was woken up by the sound of drumming. It sounded like a single drum, and was a rhythmic beat, like bum, 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 bum. If anyone is familiar with the Cleveland Indians baseball team, now the Guardians, they used to have a guy who would beat on a native-style drum, and it sounded exactly like that. It was loud and close-sounding, and it reverberated throughout the valley we were camped in. If I were to guess, I would say it sounded as if it was within 100 yards of our location. I got up out of my tent to investigate, and my friend had also been woken up by the sound. We couldn't see anything other than the dark woods around us. This continued for at least 2 hours until I was able to fall back asleep. The next morning we woke up. All was normal. We continued on our hike and did not see any other campers around. I have no clue what it was. I've watched YouTube videos of grouse drumming, and that definitely wasn't it. Obviously, it could have been a person, and likely was, but setting out in the middle of the woods at night drumming on a drum for at least 2 hours straight without skipping a beat? Perhaps is there some Native American ritual which calls for this? I guess this story isn't too creepy, but I've been obsessing over the answer to this since Sunday morning. If anyone has any ideas or suggestions, please let me know. A while back, myself, my girlfriend, and another couple spends a day on the beach along the Davidson River and had a very odd experience. We had found this spot the day before, and 3 of us spent the day chilling. One friend goes upriver about 500 yards around the bend and comes back stating that he's heard a weird noise. We disregard and continue the day, leaving without incident. Upon return the next day, it was surprisingly crowded. At about 3 p.m., the place empties out, and we are alone until maybe 5 p.m. We all begin to pack the car, that's maybe 50 yards away, and a friend who heard the noise and I returned to the beach for the last 2 items. We had been skipping rocks all day in complete failure, and decide let's throw a couple more before we go. We throw like 2, and all of a sudden my friend skips his easily like 40 yards, 50 times. And before we can even retract an extremely loud vibrational noise that I can only compare to buzzing off like a guitar amp that's not fully plugged in. It was so loud, and you could feel it in your chest getting closer, like a helicopter or something was going to fly over us on this riverbank. When it felt like it was going to turn into our visibility, it kept going and seemed to go over where the car was and up towards a mountain. The noise abruptly stops, and we both look at each other like, what in the actual heck was that? He looks at me and goes, that was weird, but it's going to get even weirder if the girls didn't hear it. We return to the car, and they're both in the car, angry, asking what took so long, and saying that they didn't hear a thing. We asked them how long they thought we had been gone for. They said no less than 45 minutes. I would say that we were gone for no more than 5 to 7 minutes at the most. I've spent no less than 40 days at this river spot, and have never had anything else happen, nor heard of anyone experiencing something similar. So I was out camping with a couple of friends and family for a couple of days, and we were having fun. You know, just doing the usual camping activities. You get what I mean. The second day of our camping, rain was forecasted in the middle of the night, so we decided to cover up all of the stuff that was outside so that it wouldn't get wet, and started a campfire shortly thereafter. It's almost 11 p.m. at night, and I decided to go to my tent and try to sleep while my friends and family were still outside talking by the campfire. We all go to bed sometime later, at 12, since it was going to rain anyways. It's the middle of the night at around 2 to 3 a.m., and I'm sleeping like a baby, when all of a sudden I get woken up by the rainfall coming down on my tent, and I was annoyed a bit since I didn't want to wake up at 3 a.m. So I tried going back to sleep. Then this very loud screeching, eerie sound started, and it was so loud I had to cover my ears, and even so it was still very, very loud. It went on for a couple of minutes and then stopped. When it stopped, I said to myself, what the heck was that? I thought it was some animal, but there were barely animals near the forest I was camping in, and even if there was an animal that made that sound, it wouldn't have made me cover my ears with full force, and then still be very loud. I don't know. Let me know what you guys think of what I heard. Me and my buddy were riding home through the woods in Alabama. We were going down a rural patch of road on an old highway. We had been hunting that morning and we didn't end up killing a deer, so we decided to fish and grab some food. The morning hunt felt strange, as if I was being watched in the woods. I'm a police officer and retired Marine, so I don't get spooked easily. A pack of wild dogs ran through where my stand was. I kept feeling that burning feeling of being watched. It prompted me to leave early. The dark woods of Alabama is a scary place. After the hunt, we fished at the pond for a while before returning home. On the way home, we ran into something I have struggled with since that day. It was exactly 12 noon when we saw it. Before I get into the incident, you need to know some history about Baldwin County, Alabama. The Battle of Blakely was fought along this particular highway. The battle was a bloody onslaught that occurred at the end of the Civil War and resulted in immense casualties. Now onto what happened. We were around mile marker 18, and to the right there it was, on a grassy embankment in a curve in the road, just past an old bridge that we passed stood a tall black horse with a rider wearing black armor. It had black gloves, gripping his horn of the saddle with a sword sheathed. This dark rider was massive in figure and missing his head. You heard me right, a headless horseman. The horse was abnormally large and was darker than night. The rider stoically sat in his saddle, facing the road as if he were waiting on something as we drove past. Now, I don't spook easily, and my buddy doesn't believe in that kind of thing. As we passed the horseman, time seemed to slow down as I sucked in every detail. I remember everything about it. My buddy also stared in disbelief as we seemed to glide past in the safety of the truck, like some sort of safari from heck. Now here's where it gets weird. So when we passed it, I looked back in the mirrors and poof, just like that it was gone. This area was rural. The horseman could not have come from anywhere, or be headed anywhere that fast. My friend told me shortly after that he didn't want to speak about it again. He was shaken up about it. It wasn't until later that he recounted this story, and we saw the same thing. All up until we passed the horseman. His account was that the horseman was on the left side of the road, and slowly walked into the center of the road and disappeared. I saw him clear as day on the right side of the road. Has anyone else seen him? Please let me know.
I found the courage to post this after reading the numerous sightings of North American Indian mythical creatures, specifically the short people that seem to go by many names across the tribal regions of America. This exact type of creature has been sighted and discussed among Aboriginal people in Australia for thousands of years. In the southwest region, they're known as the Waraji, or hairy bushman. Standing a few feet tall, they possessed insane strength and speed. Prior to colonization, there were stories of their friendship alliance with Aboriginal people, but also there were stories of conflict and people, or even children being taken by them. There were specific rules Aboriginal adults told their children, such as avoiding water bodies at night and the evening, and no matter what, never ever whistle in the dark. It invites the Warajis, and it only spells trouble, although even some Aboriginal people say these stories are just to warn kids about water safety. Well, in 1998, I knew none of this because I'm not Aboriginal, and at the age of 10, when this all happened, I had never even met an Aboriginal person, or been taught anything about Aboriginal culture in school. It was the 90s, and Australia had an uncomfortable relationship with the truth and colonization. Every school holidays, I used to leave the city and visit my aunt in the picturesque southwest countryside. I needed no encouragement in going because I loved the outdoors and had free rein to run amok on the dirt bike and go fishing alongside the magnificent Blackwood River whenever I felt like it. And I went a lot. It was the 90s in Australia, and incredibly safe for a 10-year-old kid to roam the landscape for miles and hours on end, all alone with nothing but a trusty pocket knife. I was able to walk through my aunt's massive property to the edge of the forest, and then into the depths where the river flowed through, fishing for trout and redfin. On the last evening before I was due to go back home to the city, I was down there fishing alone as the sun was setting. I knew I'd get into trouble being out that late, but having already snared a few trout, I figured I'd be quickly forgiven. Plus, I was still getting bites. I remember having caught the fish and kept them in an old metal bucket. I was on my last few pieces of bait when I recall hearing a tiny pinging noise on the side of the bucket. At first I thought nothing of it, because large gum nuts often fell from the trees. But then it happened again. much louder and more forceful this time. I remember checking the bucket and realized they were small rocks and not gum nuts at all. I looked around, assuming it was some kids from a neighboring property, which was very unlikely as it was maybe a 30-minute walk to the next property. The other side of the river backed onto the national park, where there were no other farms for miles. Plus, I hadn't come across any kids throughout my entire stay at the farm. This is where it got pretty scary. The rocks got bigger and they started flying in from different directions, cutting my cheek and hitting me in the head. At this stage, I started crying. I was only 10 after all, and dropped the fishing rod. I had 3 large trout in the bucket, and my intention was to pick it up and run back to the farm as quick as I could. As I bent to pick it up, I was hit by another rock in the side of the head and fell over. I pulled myself up, and I stared over to the other side of the river, the main source of the rocks. What I saw paralyzed my whole body with fear. It was nearly dark at this stage, but I saw the outline of 3 short-looking bodies covered in hair. I would have put them at maybe a meter tall, 3-4 feet, the size of small children but with the bodies of men. Their faces looked like they were part ape, part human. It was their eyes, though. Even though it was getting dark, their eyes had this piercing yellow glow but were completely black in the middle. They wore no clothes, but were covered in extremely thick, clumpy hair all over their bodies, except from the knees down, and had arms that hung almost like cavemen. But here's the strangest thing. They stared at me almost without moving, like literal statues, with a curious expression fixed on their faces, and making absolutely no noise whatsoever. It made no sense as only a few moments before rocks were pelting in from all directions, and yet now, they appeared frozen except for their eyes, which followed me. I managed to pull myself up and ran faster than all heck. My aunt was standing on the balcony and watched me tear through the long grass as quick as I could, with blood and cuts on my face. I told her everything, and she called the police. One officer came by to get a statement, and he said he'd visit some of the other farms around town, but he was certain there weren't any other families in the area. My aunt just assumed I couldn't see the figures properly due to the lack of light, and maybe even suffering concussion from the rocks that hit my head. She assumed they were kids or teens. I know what I saw, though, and I'll never forget those murderous-looking yellow eyes. The next morning, I went with my aunt to collect my fishing rod and bucket. My aunt was shocked to see the fishing rod and bucket still there. She thought it was an opportunistic crime. We checked the bucket, and what we saw made our skin crawl. 3 perfect trout skeletons were floating in the bucket, not one morsel left. We don't have bears and wolves in Australia, and even the odd dingo or fox wouldn't devour an entire fish and leave its skeleton there without the bucket being tipped over. The whole ordeal was terrifying, but as things tend to happen when you're a kid, you just forget about it, or it lives somewhere in the back of your mind rent-free for a while. The police officer found nothing of note, and as nothing was stolen, there was no need for further inquiry. It was the talk of the country pub for a few weeks, though. My aunt was a local. The town had experienced odd things throughout the years, such as the sighting of tiger-like animals in the deep forest, and other strange noises happenings reported by lumberjacks in the deep forest. It wasn't until I got into my 20s and become a social worker that I started working with Aboriginal communities in town. During celebratory events, I came to learn of the different Dreamtime creation stories, and eventually I had the confidence to tell an elder about what I went through. He recognized it as the Wirajis straight away, and said I was lucky to leave that forest alive. He seemed to think that they must have believed I was an Aboriginal boy. I have a mixed racial background, and the protocol would have been for me to leave a couple of fish outside the bucket, skewered on sticks for them to come and collect after as payment for fishing in their river. But as I didn't, they reminded me, first few pelts, and when I still didn't, they eventually attacked. There aren't any Aboriginal families in that part of the Southwest, Caucasian only, to this day, which may explain why it only happened to me. The elder believed they could have taken me, though, for disobeying their sacred customs. That part wakes me up in a cold sweat in the middle of the night, because I believe they could have.
It's not a story I tell to my family and friends, but will confide in with the odd Aboriginal colleague or client at work, and they tell me similar things. Don't even get me started on the Australian desert. I'm 36 now, and as time goes on, I find this event something I think about more often as the years roll on. Despite becoming more logical and cynical in age, I ponder its significance and proof of otherworldly beings living alongside us on this planet. Thanks for reading. Things in this world aren't always as they seem, and there appears to be much beyond our comprehension and what we are often taught growing up. This all started in the spring of 2018, when my fiancée and I decided to move back to her family's farm. Our first house was small, but the price was right, and it had what we needed with 5 acres and a barn. But after 5 years, the plumbing was having issues, and we found severe termite damage that was going to be more trouble than it was worth. Financially, we couldn't afford to build what we wanted yet, and even though we both swore we would never live in a double wide, that's what we decided was the best plan of action given the circumstances until we can build our dream barn dominium on the farm. So our house is delivered and set up in March. We have 50 acres that is bordered by the Ouachita National Forest. To an outsider, these mountains may not seem like much, but it's one of the oldest mountain ranges in North America, and erosion beyond our comprehension dwindled what easily rivaled the Rockies into what you see today. This was a dream for an outdoorsman like myself. Not only did we have our own 50 acres to hunt on, but thousands upon thousands of acres of deciduous mountains to roam freely. But the farm did have its oddities, and weird things sometimes happened. The first year we dated, we hunted a couple times there, and I discovered very quickly the land behind the barn was uncomfortable. It just gives you the willies and feeling of being watched. This area has a rich history of a main wagon trail and Indian trail very close by. Then there's the history of the haunted inn that is on the property adjoining ours, with the inn having burned down years ago. There were many shootings over poker games and stagecoach robberies, some even reported to have been by the James Gang, and the possibility of gold buried nearby from them, or the Knights of the Golden Circle. Maybe that history contributes to those feelings somehow. The property basically laid out like a rectangle with 2 large barns on the east side, where the driveway comes up from south to north and runs back west. Like a large L first was our house. The next house was my fiancée grandma's, and at the inn was my soon-to-be in-laws. I walked over to my in-laws to get some screws working on the porch, and that's where it all started, even though I was unaware until the next day. But more on that later. It was dark out when we decided to go feed our goats that were over at the barn. As we walk out, my fiancée said something big and black ran through the yard. I was like, well, how big? Our door is a mere 30 yard to the tree line that goes straight up the mountain, and we have bear from time to time, but she said more like a large dog. We got in the Jeep, and instead of heading to the barn, I turned west towards the in-laws to use the headlights, and sure enough, there was yellow eye shine and the outline of a large black dog that was maybe 60 yards from me. I get out with a cheap flashlight and call to the dog, but I get bow reaction. Just 2 large yellow eyes staring back perfectly still. So I approached the it slowly, talking to it, trying to call it over to me, and it just trots back toward my yard. So I walk down the drive back into the yard and trying to approach it again, and I get about 25 yards from it this time, but something wasn't right about it. It all felt off. I wasn't scared or feel threatened really, but it didn't feel right. Then it hits me. Like a ton of bricks, it was as if this thing absorbed light, like some dark void from another realm. No matter how hard I tried to focus my eyes or adjust the light, I couldn't make out anything with this thing before me. Other than it appeared to be a dog that absorbed light. Cool. That's believable. It eventually grew tired of me, wandered off across our field to the road, and I wrote it off as a neighbor's dog and moved on with my night.
The next day, my fiance's grandma asked me about our big black dog. I replied with a puzzled look, and we don't have a black dog. She told me when I walked back over from getting the screws the previous day that it came down out of the woods and had followed me back towards our house. I told her that must be the dog we saw last night. I had told my fiance about how it seemed to absorb light, and something just didn't seem quite right with it all. And it was also massive. My shepherd is 70 pounds, and our Pyrenees Anatolian mix was 85 pounds, and it dwarfed either of them. 2 days passed without seeing the dog, and it was out of mind and rode off as a neighbor's dog from down the road, or one that was dumped. 2 a.m. I'm awakened by my shepherd and Pyrenees in the house, going ballistic, barking, growling, trying to get out of their kennels. I get up, walk to the outside door quiet as I can, while the digs go ballistic and flip on the light, and the beast was on my steps and appeared to have been sniffing around the door. Soon as I turned the lights on, in one fast motion this thing did a 180, leapt off the steps, and was gone into the darkness again. But this time I saw it tail, a long bushy tail like my shepherd's, but bigger and pointed ears, the black wolf. I know what you are thinking. It doesn't scary but to see it. The way it seemed to absorb light, it felt like pure evil, pure hatred. Something was very unnatural about it. My brother-in-law calls me a few days later and asks if I've seen a huge black dog or had any issues. He lives down the road and just through the woods from us, so I told him about it following me in the encounters. He tells me that his pit bull he keeps out back was going wild the night before, and he went back there with a good bright light, and 30 yards away in the woodbine was a set of yellow eyes staring back. It would close its eyes, and he said you couldn't see anything like it was trying to hide. This went on a few times before he finally saw it, and described it the same way I did. Yellow eyes shaped like a large wolf, but its body, that endless black pit. Somehow it absorbed all light, and you couldn't make out any details other than yellow eyes in the outline. The day after our wedding in early May, my brother-in-law calls me to tell me it came back the night of our wedding. They got home after dark, was just sitting on the porch when he heard bawling and screaming from the woods. He grabs a 12-gauge pump and his light bears feet to investigate. And there's the black wolf again in the edge of the thicket, just the yellow eyes piercing back at him. Deciding he's had enough, he took aim and fired. But he didn't expect what happened. A set of blue eyes suddenly appeared and dropped to the ground, and the yellow eyes vanished, seemingly. He cautiously approached to see a small fawn with spots laying there, where the wolf had stood slobber all over its back and looking dazed. He went to pet it, but it stands up, runs off right into a tree, falls over, gets back up, and bounds off deeper in the woods. He looked for the wolf but didn't see anything else, and there was no blood. He chalked it up to it had caught the fawn, and he interrupted dinner and apparently missed. We spent all our money to move, putting in septic, dirt work, etc., so our honeymoon was a weekend at home before it was back to work. I told my wife I wanted to go investigate his claim. We get to his house, and he recounts his story as we make our way to the location. I look for blood, hair, anything, and find nothing. So I start making circles in the woods, and come across a big doe that was undoubtedly the little fawn's mother. I find no signs of injury on her, and can only assume she was hit by a car, and that's just where she made it to. Saddened for the poor fawn, knowing it won't survive, and likely ended up being dinner for the wolf or coyotes. Days passed without the wolf coming back, turned to weeks, turned to months. Then the dream happened. We were at a horse show, and my mother-in-law's trying to get my wife to get this horse. I told her absolutely not. We are not getting another horse, no way. It was a solid black gelding with a white blaze on its face. Next thing I know, I'm in my kitchen, looking out the window into the round pen, and that horse is standing there staring at me. My in-laws had gotten it anyway. I went to ask my wife about it but couldn't find her. And when I looked back, it changed to a very dark, very weathered, haggard Indian-looking lady with long, matted black hair and dreads long yellow fingernails. and wearing a very tattered, dirty, long black dress. With it over her head, the material almost looked like weathered burlap or fringe, and when she saw me looking at her, she smiled. Even though it was a dream, I can still remember the smile. The nastiest yellow teeth ever. I spent the rest of my dream asking people about the witch that lives in the woods by the barn. Things pretty much calmed down after that for a while. Every now and then I'd see a tree with claw marks about 6 feet high. I figured was a bear. One night, while skinning a big 10 PT buck something between us at the barn and our house, lets out a huge roar, growl. Anytime you skin deer at the barn at night, something paces just inside the thicket. Sometimes it will come right for you, but shine the light, and there's nothing to see and it stops moving. Soon as you ignore it, it will start to move again. I always leave the carcass, and the next day they are gone. My wife was alone in the barn, taking care of a goat that just had babies and getting them situated while I got something she needed from home. These were originally hay barns, so the upper half on each end is open so you can hear outside pretty well when something growls at her from right outside the barn, and she tells me to hurry up and bring a rifle. But besides that, everything was pretty calm. Until it wasn't. I'm not sure what changed. It's been a few years since the wolf was around, but I couldn't shake the feeling it was back. I had off-the-wall nightmares, wake up in a state of fright at random. My shepherd would wake us up at 2 a.m. sometimes nights in a row, barking, growling, and wanting out. I let her out the first time, and she bolts straight up the mountain. I grabbed a shotgun that stayed by the door, no light, and took off after her. I finally got her called back to me, but couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. I felt like it was trying to lure her up the mountain. Maybe because IT knew I would follow. Sometimes we would wake up because it sounded like something slapped the house, but we never could find anything. It happened again. My shepherd losing her marbles at 2 a.m. wakes me up, but this time there's terrible screams coming from the goat's pen. I rush out, but it's too late. Whatever it was is gone, and so is one of the goats. The rest huddled into a corner of the shelter trembling. I could hear the goat's cries as it was carried up and over the mountain at incredible speed. I felt so defeated. This was war. It has to stop. This land is ancient, but now it's our land. It's our home. We will not be ran off. I searched online and found no help, just a lot of people that fake scary things for social media attention. No real info. So I went to folklore. I cast some 405 GR bullets with silver mixed into the lead and loaded them in Starline brass. I was going to put that new 45/70ths with the tritium front night sight to good use. It was cool out that evening. I had my favorite meal in case it was my last. I had no idea what I was up against, or if this would work. Would it even show up again? I climbed up on my roof and settled in. The moon was about 3/4 full, so plenty of light to see from my elevated position. I started to doze off. I couldn't keep myself awake, it seemed. I awoke with a start. No idea how long I had been out, but it was silent. Uncomfortably silent. I caught movement by the drive, as a large, low black shadow crept in towards the goats. I steadied that green glowing front sight on whatever my adversary actually was, and squeezed the trigger. Click. Oh no. In my sleepy state, I forgot the stupid crossbolt safety that won't let the hammer fall all the way. The black wolf stands up on its hind legs, lets out the awful roar, growl, that we have heard before, the most primal sound you have ever heard. It reverberates in your chest. It's so loud, but I could barely hear it over the adrenaline dump and racing heartbeat in my ears. I cocked the hammer again, took the safety off as it dropped back to all fours and squeezed the trigger. The heartbeat in my ears was replaced by tinnitus from the roar of the rifle, and I lost some of my night vision from the muzzle flash. The beast had fell to the ground, thrashed about, then bolted back into the woods. I stayed up there till daylight, watching. After the sun came up, and it was plenty bright enough to see, I walked to where the best stood, and there was nasty-looking hunk of gray meat that smelled awful. It was the most rotten, putrid smell you could imagine. I knew it had to be there. That was a 405 GR slug that can easily stop a grizzly mid-charge. As I made it to the woods, I could see small spots of dried blood, but not much and not creature. I followed the trail where I could see overturned leaves, a broken twig or ground disturbance. After I made it to the top, I was really hoping I had recruited some help. I pushed on, being cautious and watching, trying to not be led into a trap of its own. I followed the trail over to the property line of the haunted inn. The land was up for sale. It never had anyone own it for long, it seemed, and I had a job to see through, so pushed on. It led me down the mountain towards where the inn used to be. Before I reached the site of the inn, the trail led me by what appeared to be an old unmarked grave, and back up the ridge, and up a steep narrow ravine with large chunk rock and boulders. At the very top was a small opening to a cave, or abandoned silver mine possibly. The area stunk so bad I could hardly keep from throwing up. The large rock overhang had some kind of old symbols carved into it, but no time to be distracted. I looked into the hole as best I could see, and I swear there was an old spear in there, like what the conquistadors carried. There was no way I was fixing to go in and find out, though. Between the smell, the horror of what I had seen, and how it made it all the way back here, I was done. I wanted to go home. So I did. It's been 3 years now, with no sightings or strangeness. I just make sure and leave a deer at that corner of the property every year. It's never there when I come back. I guess we have some understanding. How it all ties together is anyone's guess.
I don't think it's paranormal, but a very strange encounter, and I'm sure that guy was not a human being. So once I went to KFC with my family. We were standing in line to take our order, and then I saw a guy standing on the side of the line, wearing a baseball cap and a heavy black coat. I don't know how to say it, but he was gorgeous. I mean, he was very beautiful. Maybe he was too, waiting for his order. Then my husband said, "You wait over there on that side, I'll bring the order." Then I also went and stood behind him. But like seconds I went there. My baby, who was 2 years old, suddenly started crying. I tried to calm him down, but he was not stopping. So I started roaming here and there. And as I went away from the guy, my baby became silent. I thought maybe he will not cry now. So I again stood behind that guy. But he again started crying, and it happened maybe like 3 or 4 more times. And now I too started feeling strange. I looked towards that guy and he was looking at me just like a predator. There was no emotion in his eyes. They were completely empty. Then suddenly he smiled and walked away from there. After he walked away, the cashier said, "Was this guy a human being? He was so creepy." Sorry for my bad English. It's not my native language. So this could play a part in the little people not liking outsiders fishing their waters. I'm like a tiny percent native, allegedly, so I don't know if that counts. But me and a few friends were night catfishing. We go fairly often. There's a spot where someone carved the green man's face into a rock one night. We're fishing, and on my line I had a 2-ounce weight, bait, big hook, and a float. And all I did was lightly reel it back in. Friends holding the light watching me do this, like I always do to check bait after no bites. Then we heard something slam into the rocky hill behind us. It was my entire bait setup. It wasn't snagged on anything, but it was like something grabbed my entire bait set out of the river and threw it back at us over our heads in the side of the hill. For that to happen with that much weight, my rod would have to be like bent in a U shape and clearly snagged, but it wasn't. That's the craziest thing that's happened to me while fishing. But we've heard strange sounds and have seen some strange things in the sky. But that's really it. Then we heard a gunshot shortly after off in the distance. It was like 1 a.m. So we decided to call it a night. The village I grew up in has a very heavy vibe due to thousands of graves literally everywhere, including our backyards and under houses. Even walking along the beaches, the graves get uncovered at times, and we have to kind of cover them up. I don't know if it's a cryptid, but we have experiences with spirits that are mimics. For example, one time I was locked out of the family home as I was visiting, so I was waiting outside on the lawn on the opposite side of the house from the driveway. I just cracked a refreshing beverage when I saw my mom walk by in her pink Angora cardigan inside the house. Thinking she's home, I walked around the house to the front door and it was locked and her car wasn't there yet. She pulled in like 35 minutes later. I clearly saw her walk by in the house in broad daylight, like for 3 seconds. Only thing I noticed was her hair was darker. Afterwards, when I told her about it, she dug around in the closet and pulled out the pink cardigan. Another story was a group of us were walking by a trail, and my friend's girl was walking way ahead of us, and she saw her boyfriend hide behind a big rock. He was wearing a white ball cap, so he was very noticeable. She calls out to him, and he answers because we were just arriving behind her. There was no one behind the rock. I had one of those dreams where you're aware of your dreaming, and it was super realistic. I was walking down the block past our formal graveyard, and there's a large field. When I looked into the field, I saw an army of shadow men arranged in rows like an army. Turns out, I wasn't the only one to have dreams about the ghost army. Sometimes at night, I would go out and talk to them when intoxicated. Spirit possession, dances, were very common over 100 years ago in our tribe. Some were very powerful. I read records of the family headman dragging 10 big men around like nothing by ropes, attached to flesh hooks in his back in the 1920s. Thank you so much for listening to all of the stories in this video. I hope you enjoyed them. I also hope that you enjoyed the extra rain at the end. Get a good night's sleep, everyone, and I'll read to you in the next video. Bye-bye now.